Hello everybody, it's Morgan here, and today we'll be reading Night Guards Chapter 2. Anvil was feeling unusually comfortable where he lay. He opened a bleary eye, and was greeted by the sight of polished marble ceiling, sculpted with the depiction of Pegasi and unicorns playing under the sun. This isn't the barracks. It took him a while to remember that he was no longer in his bunk, but instead in one of the chambers usually reserved for distinguished guests. Nightmare Moon, no, Luna, had offered him and Hammer more extravagant quarters, as befitting their recent promotion to Champions of the Night Guard. Hammer had declined and remained in the barracks, but Anvil had seen no harm in accepting her offer. He always wondered what it would be like to sleep on a rich pony's bed, complete with thick, fine woven covers and down pillows. And now I know. Anvil stretched slowly, savouring the caress of the warmth, smooth soft fabric and pillows. He could practically feel the laziness seeping into his hide. Small wonder the nobles were always so relaxed. He looked out of the window and caught sight of the almost full moon changing its hue from a luminescent blue to silver. It was Luna's substitute for the daily cycle of night and day, with blue representing night and silver representing day. With a groan, Anvil quickly crawled out of bed before its softness could tempt him further. Comfort was well and good, but it had a tendency to dull perfectly sharp guards, and it was like keeping iron tools in water. As it were, he was lucky that his old habit of rising at dawn was enough to keep him from slacking, this time. He'd have to apologise to Luna and move back to standard hay before it got to him. He looked wistfully at the bed. Oh, how I will miss you. Before donning his helm and boarding, he could not help taking a look in the mirror, as he did almost regularly since the night Luna seized the throne. Even without his armour, he still looked the same as he did after Luna had worked her magic on him, complete with dragon wings and slit pupils. Unlike the enchantments on the old royal guards, his and Hammer's appeared to be permanent. Scars from battles and his metalworking days were gone, and he wondered where his eyes would ever be sky blue again, or his coat a bright orange. The slit pupils certainly looked more formidable, but he wasn't sure if he wanted to look like that all the time. Never mind, there was no point in thinking about things beyond his control. He fitted his armour, and without further delay left his quarters soon after. He found Hammer in the moonlit training yard, supervising some 40-odd recruits of the Royal Guard. After Luna's coup, most of the Royal Guards had refused to bend knee to her, and she'd had them thrown in the dungeons. Those that eluded capture and fled had gone into hiding. "You look tired," the big Pegasus commented. "Rich pony's bed too hard for you?" After a stifled yawn. "Too nice, actually. Suddenly 6 hours doesn't feel quite enough for me. It's tragic, really." His friend gave him a look. He snorted. Yes, I should listen to you more often." He switched his gaze to the recruits, looking for an excuse to change the subject. Captain Volley, one of the few who had remained to serve Luna, was among them, demonstrating close-quarter combat with rather nervous volunteer. They were fairly young, and if Anvil was to give an honest opinion, conscripts might be more an apt term for them. Their night guard armour hung somewhat loosely from their skinny frames, and their appearance-altering enchantments did little to make them more imposing. If anything, it made them look like skinny grey bats, and their flailing versions of hoof-to-hoof combat made it plain that they were quite unsuitable to be royal guards so soon. But then again, it was either that or they'd have the entire palace grounds guarded by a mere dozen so guards remaining, himself and Hammer included. "Where did these fellows come from?" he asked. "I thought the houses of Cloudsdale were running out of young ones to send to the guard." "They're not all from Cloudsdale. Some are from Everfree, and the rest are from the outlying towns," Hammer replied. I wouldn't have thought that there were so many Pegasi living on," Anvil began. but stopped short when he noticed that he'd not been paying proper attention to detail. No wonder he thought something was unusual about them. Almost half the recruits were unicorns. He cleared his throat and resumed. I see you've made some changes to the recruitment practice. Hammer nodded. After what some Cloud did to us, I'm not letting that happen again. Besides, it would do the Cloud Lords some good to learn that their sons aren't the only ones who can serve in the Guard. Does magic mix well with hand combat? Well, we don't exactly have any pony skilled in both over here. He absent-mindedly tried to scratch his mane through his helmet. Hayseed, I don't even think there's ever been a unicorn in the Guard before. Hammer gave a non-committal grunt. We might as well start. I've sent a missive to the Arcane Academy. If we're lucky, the headmaster will spare us some pony who can train these fellows. As for mixing it with physical combat, we'll make it up as we go along. There's bound to be some creative minds amongst them. Does Luna know about this? I do, and I most certainly approve, a regal voice said behind them. A regular pony might have jumped in surprise, but any pony who'd served long enough in the Guard would have gotten used to the Moon Princess's habit of appearing behind ponies' backs. Apparently her transformation hadn't changed that. Anvil and his friend calmly turned around and bowed. Your Highness, rise and walk with me, she commanded to Anvil. To Anvil. To Hammer, she simply said, carry on. I want these recruits fit for duty before the full moon. Your Highness, there's only a few days away, Hammer started. Luna's mouth curled down slightly. Is there a problem? There won't be enough of you veterans to watch over the upcoming night festival, and I certainly will not have citizens of Everfree being watched over by stable colts dressed in armour. I will not lie, they're very raw. As if you've proven the point, there was a loud yelp from the training yard. It seems that one of the recruits had accidentally twisted his sparring partner's wing. After sparring the trainees a glance, Hammer continued, I'll do what I can to prepare them, but I cannot promise that they will be able soldiers in that time. The Dark Alicorn scowled, but Hammer didn't flinch and patiently awaited her response. Finally, she said, very well, do what you can, at least make them look presentable. The last thing I need is to look like I'm surrounded by incompetence. Where are we going? Anvil asked. To the dungeons. I have a special test for you, Luna said as they trotted side by side through the halls of the illuminated by the new glowworm lamps. We've captured another celestial artist, and I want you to be the one to interrogate her. That surprised him. There were still plenty of ponies who were less than happy with Nightmare Moon as the new leader, not to mention that whole part about Eternal Night. Most were what she called rabble-rousers, who did little more than complain and gossip. But there were some stronger-willed ponies who were actually attempting to incite rebellion amongst the citizens of Everfree. A large number of them were former royal guards, and not to be taken lightly. Rabble-rousers were easily quelled by Luna's remainder of guards. But the real troublemakers were always gone by the time the night guard could reach the scene. There were too few of them to keep watch over the entire city. Anvil slowed in his trot. Wait, you mean we've actually caught some pony who's part of the chain of command? If not privy to their to their plans, she was at least certain to have knowledge of their hiding places. One of the guards caught her trying to sneak into the library. She managed to incapacitate him with magic, but then she had the misfortune of running into me. Oh, the look on her face was priceless. She really should have known better than to try and skulk around during my reading hours, Luna chuckled with glee. Library? It's an odd place to break into. And how did she get into the palace in the first place? Anvil almost felt like kicking himself when he realised the second bit was a rather stupid question. Apparently Luna was in too good mood to pin it on incompetence. Apart from, apart from the, hold on, I've lost where I am. Apart from the fact that you're all stretched thin patrolling the palace, she had snuck up to the lower gardens. She was filthy, and I could smell the moss and damp on her hooves. As to the former, there's plenty of knowledge hidden in the library. No doubt she believed that there was something there that could be used to further their plans. Well, it's good that she was stopped. Why me? I'm not exactly the most likely to, scare information out of anybody. Because I believe there are ways to acquire her knowledge other than simple intimidation. The connection to you is one such path. Anvil felt his brows shoot up. Connection? I suppose I should actually tell you who she is. She's my dear sister's apprentice, Summer Cloud. Oh. He froze in his tracks. And you are besotted with her, are you not? Anvil felt himself go red. Well, it's a little one-sided. I'm not sure she feels the same about me. The luminescent mane shifted, and its flowing tip curled under his chin. Felt surprisingly smooth and warm as it lifted his face to meet her eyes. Good enough for me, she said. Use it to your advantage. Recent events have shaken her trust in you. Regain it. Then find out what you can about the loyalists. Anything that will help me put a stop to their nonsense. I've had enough trouble adjusting Equestria to the eternal night without having to deal with rebellious subjects. He nodded wordlessly, and then she released her grip on his chin. And before he could think better of it, words were out of his mouth. Your Highness, aren't you worried that all Summer Cloud might use is my affection to her own advantage? Stupid pony. Your mouth shouldn't be quicker than your brain. Luna looked as if she'd just been pelted with a snowball. She tensed up and fixed him with a stare that might have put her cockatrice to shame. He blinked innocently. A moment of silence passed, and then a smile cracked her features, and she began to laugh. Anvil nervously laughed along. When she was finished, she nudged him forward with a wing and continued their trot down the hall. Oh, you're such a tease. You've already proven your loyalty to me. Besides, if you really did turn on me, I could always feed you to a hydra. There are hatchlings in one of the bogs, and they do get oh so hungry at times. Anvil hoped she didn't hear him gulp. Luna would never do that. But he wasn't too sure about Nightmare Moon, and he definitely wasn't certain that Summer Cloud wouldn't be able to sway his perspective on the matter. The dark alicorn had apparently picked up on his nerves, for she scoffed and playfully patted him on the head. It was a jest, Anvil. I can practically hear you sweating. Then her mirth subsided and her tone grew serious. But truly, if you believe you've done something that might be considered the slightest treachery on your part, you can always come to me and confess. Imagine how much less furious I would be learning it from you rather than someone else. With that said, she offered him a reassuring smile, and they made their way to the dungeons. The Everfree Palace was built on top of a cliff, overlooking the ravine that had been eroded by the force of a sizable river. Whilst most of the palace structure sat on fairly even ground, some of it was hewn directly into the face of the cliff, below ground level. The library was one of them, and others were still actually inside the cliff, or underground, depending on how you looked at it. And that was where Anvil was being led. They descended from the old barracks and down through the series of disused stairwells and dark tunnels. If not for the faint glow of the Moon Princess's mane and the luminous mushrooms, it would have been pitch-black darkness. By his estimations, the dungeons were as deep as the palace was tall. At the end of the passage, there was a large oaken door guarded by another member of the Night Guard, who promptly bowed to the dark alicorn when she approached. Anvil recognised Rippledew and greeted him with a slight nod when he had risen. How may I serve you, your highness? The guard asked. This is my champion. No doubt you recognise him. From now on, he has my leave to enter and leave the dungeons as he sees fit, and you'll provide him with whatever he needs to carry out this interrogation. You may speak to any of the prisoners, but the deepest arcane cell is off limits. No pony may speak to my sister but me. Is that clear? Rippledew eyed him over and nodded. Understood, Your Highness. Luna turned her attention to Anvil and said, This is where I leave you. Other pressing matters need my attention. Remember what I told you? How long do I have? He asked. She snorted out blue smoke in response. So long as you do not tarry. I see no reason to put undue pressure on you, but remember, every passing day is one more day for those traitors to plot against me. So not very much pressure at all, he thought, at the back of his mind. He bowed in response, and she began her walk back up to the more pleasant parts of the palace. Turning to Ripple, he smiled and said, Lead the way. We'll have a few words with the new prisoner. The guard produced a set of keys and unlocked the great door. As they both entered without further ado, the inside was much more spacious than the tunnels might have indicated. Indeed, it was also more pleasant. The stonework was nice and dry for a start, and the palace was lit with proper torches and braziers. It was surprisingly clean. As the dungeons went this way, probably one of the nicer ones. Off to one side was the supply room, complete with a shaft and pulley system that brought food and supplies down from the upper levels. Rippledew led him past this and currently deserted guard room, past another locked door and into the dungeon proper. As they trotted past the cells occupied by former royal guards, Anvil couldn't help averting his eyes. He had no doubt he'd recognise many of them. Whispers of traitor and monster and the like drifted past his ears, and even a few spat at him. Pay them no heed, Ripple murmured. He didn't even flinch when somebody flung mouldy hay at him. How do you stand it, asked Anvil, once they had passed the occupied cells. He wiped his face with a hoof, and it came away all sticky. As much as he tried to tell himself he could have brought himself to betray Luna, the fact that he betrayed his other princess, and the possibility those who supported her as well, speculating along with what they might think of him, drove him to distraction. I often wonder about that myself, Rippledew replied. But what's done is done. Nightmare Moon has claimed the throne, and for better or for worse. It's not my place to say. These things have a habit of sorting themselves out in the end. It was a quick trot the rest of the way to Summercloud's cell, and they found the grey mare curled up facing a far corner, presumably asleep. Ripple was just about to strike the bars to wake her, but Anvil caught his hoof and shook his head. The guard raised an eyebrow, but relented and said, If you need anything, come find me. Before heading back the way they'd come when he was gone, Anvil turned his attention to Summer. It has occurred to him that on the way here she might not have been treated gently when she was captured. But a curiosity of inspection of her resting figure allowed him to dismiss those concerns. If anything, it was a bigger surprise that she was dirtier than the cell itself. There was some muck on her hooves and a generous smear of grime on her grey coat and a turquoise mane and tail. Her braids were also getting scruffy. Luna was right. The damp and earthy smell told him that she'd been down in the ravine below. For a while, all he could do was watch her, but eventually he worked up the courage to speak. Summer, he tentatively asked. My friends call me Summer. You may call me Miss, was the terse reply. So she wasn't asleep after all. I just wanted to talk for a while. No, go away. And we're off to a wonderful start, Anvil sighed. Summer, I'm sorry about what happened. I know that Luna has done some unsavoury things in the past few days, but I don't believe that it's entirely because she's evil, or whatever it is that the loyalists are calling her now. After a pause he added, Please? Summer rose and trotted closer to the bars, then sat on her haunches and looked at him with a resigned expression. Well, you certainly don't need my permission. Talk. Anvil had prepared a whole carload of excuses for his prior actions to coax her into a more cooperative mood, but now that she'd actually decided to listen to him, he suddenly found his brain fresh out of ideas on where to start. Summer Cloud continued to look at him expectantly. He opened his mouth and then closed it with nothing came out. Those amber eyes of hers seemed to stare right into his soul. She was getting bored, he could tell. He began to sweat. This really isn't how an interrogation is supposed to work. If I was a paras, if it was, it was as if a parasprite had gotten into his brain and was happily munching away on anything that remotely resembled a coherent sentence. Eventually, Summer simply snorted, rose up on all fours, and was just about to turn away, possibly ignore him for the rest of the session. He blabbed. Luna asked me to find out what you know about the Loyalists. Mentally, he was kicking himself. Oh, horse apples. I'm terrible at this. The unicorn mare was giving him a funny look, with narrow eyes and a furrowed brow. Whether in surprise or suspicion, he wasn't sure. Probably both. He gave her an awkward grin to match the ensuring silence. A moment later, she raised an eyebrow and said, "Are you sure this is how an interrogation works? Information is supposed to go the other way." He scratched his helmet. "Yes, well, it didn't come out quite as I intended. I'm new to this, you know." A tiny smile curled on her mouth before disappearing, and she shook her head and sat back down. "Care to try again?" This time, he settled on asking something that had been nagging the back of his mind. "What spell did you use on us that time? It was interesting." "You know I teach others the use of magic. It's my special talent." Summercloud tilted her head towards her cutie mark of a spiraling swirl of stardust and continued, "It was a magical empathy spell. It allows others to see and feel magic the way I do. And the reverse as well. When it comes to teaching, words can only do so much." She glanced around as if afraid of being overheard and trotted right up to the cell bars. She then beckoned him closer. Curiosity piqued, Anvil brought his face within whispering distance, and when Summer's horn began to glow, he realized that he'd made a mistake. "Here, I'll show you," she said. A green spark arced around onto his forehead, and, "Oh, clever filly," was his last thought before she relieved the nauseating multicolored display of lights in his head. It wasn't as bad as he remembered, but it was still enough to make him curl up on the floor, clutching his head and wincing. The unicorn carried on with her lecture, as if nothing was amiss. "I'm channeling a little illumination spell right now, and what you're experiencing is a mental manifestation, the sensation of the magic. Every unicorn has a sense in varying degrees, but for those that have no affinity for magic, namely you, the experience would be highly disorientating. Wouldn't you agree?" Anvil didn't answer. He was too busy keeping his stomach under control. "Oh, don't be such a filly," Summer huffed. "It shouldn't be that bad. You wouldn't be sensing the princess's spell, like last time. And whilst I am well versed in magical theory and spellcraft, the sheer power is something that I lack. Besides, the severity lessens with each successive encounter." Anvil heard the sound of Summer's spell dissipating, and the lights in his head began to fade away, allowing him to slowly get back on all four hooves. Pouted at her and said, "Well, that was educational. But the practical demonstration really necessary?" His freshly unsettled stomach seemed to gurgle in agreement. Some of the unicorn's former animosity returned. "You were asking for it. You betrayed my teacher, assisted Nightmare Moon in taking over, supported her in Eternal Nightbeast, and then act surprised when I don't treat you nicely." As if to emphasize the point, she swept her gaze across the iron bars between them, and then towards the corridor that led to the deepest part of the dungeon. "And she has imprisoned her own sister in this place. My mentor is allowed no visitors, no letters, and the only time she sees another pony's face is when the warden delivers her food." Summer shook her head in disbelief. "Do you honestly believe she is working for the good of Equestria?" "What I believe doesn't." Summer reached out with a hoof and stifled his words. "No, stop. That's an answer that Hammer would give, and we all know what he's like when it comes to giving opinions. I want to hear your reason for the following nightmare moon. And when it was obvious to every pony else that she's changing things for the worse. The birds don't sing anymore. It's always cold, dark and gloomy, and any pony who dares to speak out is quickly arrested by our night god ruffians. Champion. She spoke that last bit as if it was a dirty word. Animal stared at the floor and racked his answer. And it looks like you need to hear your own reason as well, the grey mane quipped. And to believe that Everfree is under the protection of the guards who can tell the difference between right and wrong. Well, Nightmare Moon hasn't done anything for the good of Equestria yet, has she? No, not yet, Anvil sighed. And it was then that the answer came to him. For all her grand speeches about bringing about glory of her knight to Equestria, there was instances when he'd seen her distracted and uncertain about what she was doing. She would sometimes wander the halls with a brooding expression, fiddling with an abacus and murmuring to herself. It was an old habit of hers, one that betrayed her state of nervousness, and her appearance might have changed, but he could tell that she was the old Luna he knew, different yet somehow still the same. He drew himself up to meet Summerclad's praising gaze, adding, "But I still trust her, and so does Hammer." "Elaborate, please," the grey unicorn said. "It's not exactly a short story." Summer rolled her eyes and lay down on the floor, settling into a more comfortable position. "I'm in no hurry, and I last checked, you're quite fond of talking." Neville settled down, took off his helmet and laid it by his side. "Right, you asked for it. Don't blame me if I took your ears off." At sight of her unamused expression, he chuckled nervously and continued, "I haven't told you about when Hammer and I became her personal guard, have I?" She shrugged. "I only know that your skills in metalworking were considered valuable, and it must have influenced the decision to draft you into service." "Well, it's a little more than that. We recruited because it would have been cheaper for the guards to have its own blacksmiths. The Clydesdale mastersmiths are not known for their generous pricing. Here," he tapped his helmet for emphasis. "And then came along two young, unassuming, ground-loving Pegasine metal workers, who weren't too fussy about how many bits you paid them. But you no longer work at the forge." He waved his hoof vaguely in the air. "I'm getting to that. It wasn't until after we finished our basic training that we got to know Luna properly. There was a particular season when one out of the far-out mining towns ceased to send iron to Everfree, and runners sent to them were not returning. Luna decided to investigate the matter herself. She just happened to take Hammer and me as her escorts." "Are you referring to Cobbleville?" Summer interjected. "Didn't know you were both there when it happened." "Huh. It was before you knew us, and we don't talk much about it." "Why not? What happened there apart from the ordinary?" "Firstly, Hammer. Secondly, I almost met a rather ignorant end that day, so it's not exactly a fond memory." He paused and sifted through his reconciliations, then shook his head and chuckled. "Poor Sevils. We went in there expecting some trouble, but not quite that much.